All right, let's dive in. Today, we're cracking open the story hidden inside a tiny gourmet snack. Yep, we're talking about the pine nut and a global mystery that connects a weird, bitter taste in your mouth to an insect invasion happening thousands of miles away.
So, here's a strange question for you. Imagine you eat a fantastic salad, or maybe some pesto pasta, but then for the next week, everything, and I mean everything, tastes metallic and just awful. It sounds kind of made up, right? But for thousands of people, this became a very real and super confusing experience.
And that strange experience? Well, that's the starting point for our investigation into what scientists have actually called the pine nut mystery. Turns out, this bizarre thing has a name: pine mouth syndrome. The medical term is cacogeusia. And what's so weird about it is, it's not an allergy. You don't get any other symptoms, no rash, no stomach ache, just this intense, bitter taste that will not go away. It wasn't until cases started popping up all over the world that people began to connect the dots.
So this clearly isn't just some random fluke. Something specific has to be causing this. And to figure out what, we can't just look at the nuts themselves. We've got to look at the massive global industry behind them. We got to follow the money.
Because, to understand why someone in London or Los Angeles was suddenly getting this nasty taste from their food, we first have to wrap our heads around the booming global appetite for pine nuts. And when I say booming, I am not kidding. In the US alone, the market for pine nuts swelled into a $100 million industry. They went from being this specialty ingredient to a gourmet staple you could find pretty much everywhere.
Now, with demand just exploding, someone had to supply all those nuts, and this number right here is key. After 2004, China's production capacity for pine nuts grew tenfold. That's a huge jump, making them the dominant producer on the world stage, shipping out tons and tons to meet this new demand.
The pressure on the market was just immense. The average price for pine nuts coming into the EU literally doubled in just 10 years. When you see prices move like that, it's a huge signal of intense, almost frantic demand. So you've got this high-stakes, high-pressure situation. Everybody wants pine nuts, and they're willing to pay top dollar for them. But what happens when the traditional, high-quality sources, the ones in Europe, just can't keep up? Because at the exact same time the market was heating up, something else was going on. Something totally unnoticed by all of us buying pesto at the supermarket. An ecological crisis was brewing. The famous Mediterranean stone pine forests, the source of those super high-quality Pinus pinea nuts, were under attack. Production was just plummeting. But it wasn't bad weather or anything like that. It was something way smaller and way more sneaky. So, meet villain number 1, the western conifer seed bug. This insect, originally from North America, turned out to be an incredible world traveler. It spread all the way to Europe, Asia, and even South America. And its whole deal is feeding on the sap from developing pine cones, which basically ruins the seeds inside. But here's the twist. The bug wasn't the only bad guy in this story. It had a local partner in crime, a fungus native to Europe called Diplodia sapinea, and together they were a truly devastating team.
And here's how they pulled it off. The bug, while it's feeding, is the perfect delivery system for the fungus. It carries it along and introduces the pathogen right into the cone. Once inside, the fungus just runs wild, completely destroying those valuable pine nuts. It was a perfect ecological storm.
Okay, so now we have these two completely separate stories, right? There's a weird taste disturbance affecting people, and then there's this insect-fungus team-up wrecking forests in Europe. How on earth do these two connect? Well, for starters, the work of our destructive duo in the Mediterranean had a direct economic impact. With European production totally crippled, there was now this huge gap between that skyrocketing global demand and the actual supply of traditional, high-quality pine nuts. And nature abhors a vacuum, right? That supply gap got filled, but by other species. This table really tells the story. Up top, you've got the classic Mediterranean nut, Pinus pia, never been linked to pine mouth syndrome. But look at that second one, Pinus armandi, a species from China that was flooding the market. That's the one scientists repeatedly linked to all those cases of pine mouth. So, with the good stuff suddenly hard to get and super expensive, these other, less regulated species just flooded in. The problem was they were often all mixed together. The labeling was terrible, and it was pretty much impossible for anyone, even the stores, to know what they were actually selling you. And the result of all that? A global phenomenon. This table from 2011 is just a snapshot. You've got hundreds of cases in the US, dozens in the Netherlands, England, Canada, Australia, All over the world, people were getting pine moth because of this completely hidden shift in the supply chain. And this quote from the research really just nails the problem. Nuts would be shipped from one country, get repackaged in a second, and then sold in a third. This crazy web of re-exports made trying to trace where the pine nuts actually came from and what species they were nearly impossible. So we've followed the insects, we've followed the fungus, and we've followed the money. Let's put all the pieces together and talk about what this fascinating and honestly kind of bizarre story really means. So here's the verdict, the whole story in a nutshell. No pun intended. An invasive insect teams up with a local fungus in European forests. That crisis, happening at the same time as a huge spike in demand, causes a massive shift in the pine nut market. And that shift allows a different, problem-causing species of pine nut to get into the supply chain, totally undetected, which gives thousands of people a nasty, bitter taste. It's a perfect, if a little weird, example of how interconnected everything really is. At the end of the day, the story of the pine nut is a powerful reminder. A tiny bug and a microscopic fungus in a forest on one side of the world can directly affect what happens on your dinner plate on the other. All of which really leads to one final pretty important question. If a story this complicated can be hidden inside something as simple as a pine nut, well, it really makes you wonder, do you really know where your food comes from?